I just want to talk initially about Ukraine. It feels like always in war you see women and girls being the victims.
Yeah.
We spoke to the Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister on the programme last week, and she was saying she'd heard horrible stories about women being raped for hours and then murdered. So how concerned are you about what's happening to women and girls in Ukraine?
No, I'm very much concerned. I think we ultimately always think that war is about guns and bombs, but ultimately it's about women's bodies. So we are hearing stories of human trafficking on the borders, but ultimately I think rape in war is a horrific thing and something that we need to be aware of.
You mentioned there about trafficking, sex trafficking on the borders in Poland. What kind of things are you hearing, and how worried are you about what's happening?
Do you know what the whole thing is? That the patriarchy and those that want to be able to pry on women and vulnerable children will always do it during a traumatic incident such as this. So a lot of the stuff is anecdotal at the moment, but there are stories of girls going missing. And this is the thing: is like it's a large scale move of people, and traffickers and those that want to exploit young people are going to be there.
And of course, these are people who are at their most vulnerable. They've just fled a war zone.
100%, and just looking for safety. And I think it's easy for women and girls to be taken in by traffickers. I think there's a broader conversation that we need to have about the sex industry and actually how women and girls are lured into that kind of conversations. Because across Europe, there's not the conversation that we need to be having, which is about ending demand and actually really looking at the sex industry as a part of the violence against women and girls kind of framework, as opposed to some kind of business, essentially.
So the UK is obviously preparing for Ukrainian refugees to start coming here through the Friends and Family scheme, through the Homes for Ukraine scheme. How much support do you think needs to be in place for women and girls who have obviously been through this traumatic experience but also may be very vulnerable themselves?
I think we have to take a closer look, and I think the government is going to do everything it can in order to be able to support women and girls. But I think coming back to the question about human trafficking and the feeding into the sex industry, I think that's something that we have to be aware of, and it's not a conversation that is readily had in the UK within the kind of broader mainstream media. I think we kind of sensationalize it as something that, like, out of a choice or a job. But I do think actually that there is a massive problem, and we will see that through the sex industry and the abuse that women fall into as a result of that.
So is that something that you're actively pushing in your advisory role then, looking at the sex industry here?
Well, it's something that I was very much keen on talking about when we did the consultation, the fact that I don't actually think that prostitution is a choice. I don't actually see it as employment. I see it as a form of violence against women and girls, and some people think that's a relic view to have, but I think that's a view that a lot of young women are having at the moment. So I would welcome us, specifically within the Home Office or anywhere else, where within the criminal justice system, we're really looking at the sex industry as a form of harm to women and girls.
And talking again about the Ukrainian women, how much of a concern is it for you that we are getting this influx of refugees who are at their most vulnerable into people's homes? Is there a safeguarding issue there?
There is definitely a safeguarding issue. I don't think we're necessarily doing as much as that we would have done for Syrian or Afghan refugees, because there's this kind of idea, the fact that because they're Europeans, then they'll be a lot safer in terms of mixing with Westerners. And I just need to, I think within that kind of concept is, again, we've seen again and again that those that want to take advantage of vulnerable people will use this opportunity where people are looking for safety in order to abuse them. So I think we have to be wary and conscious of the fact that there are going to be some people who don't necessarily have the best intentions when they talk about taking refugees in.
There's a speed issue, isn't there? Like getting people here quickly, getting them into housing quickly, but also doing the necessary checks. Are you worried that the checks might fall by the wayside slightly? I
think because we're having these conversations, I think the checks will happen, but because it's the kind of the less rigid nature of the refugee scheme. So when people are coming in from overseas, in whether it's the Iraqis, the Afghanis, or Somalis, such as myself, I think there was a lot more scrutiny, and I think there was a lot more safeguarding that was in there, because we understood that a lot of these people couldn't speak the language and would find it hard to integrate and mix. So I think we need to be wary and not be too flippant about the fact that just because they're European refugees, that they're not going to be as vulnerable as any other refugees, essentially.
You talked there about your own background.
Yeah.
You came to the UK as a refugee, didn't you?
I did, at the age of 7, and I said that before, that I think London has a very special place in the world, where the fact that there are a lot of people that are very much conscious of what the Ukrainians are going through, be that the Somalilanders myself, the Syrians, the Sudanese. So there's a lot of people who actually understand the realities of war, which is quite horrific.
I know everyone's different, aren't they? But as a 7-year-old refugee coming here,
yeah.
What kind of thing do you think 7-year-old Ukrainian girls are going to be thinking if they are arriving in the UK?
I think that space of just like being home. So one of the things that I was lucky about was I'd lived in the UK prior to me coming back. So I think that sense of just peace and safety, and you really can't put a price on the ability of actually to be able to sleep at night and not have bombs going off. And it is a triggering thing seeing young, whether, again, I bring it back to the whole point is I know we're looking at Ukraine at the moment, but there are wars still going on in Syria, there's things happening in Afghanistan and other places, and children around the world are scared, and I think that is something that we shouldn't take for granted.
You mentioned Afghanistan. How much of a duty do you think we have to Afghanistan, given this country's role in the war there? I think we have a massive duty. I think we should be embarrassed in the way that we've actually dealt with things. And for me, again, as a Muslim brown girl, I was like, you know, the inhumanity, that the way that women are being treated, and we're completely disregarding the lives of Afghani girls is actually really, really depressing. Yeah. Why do you think we should be embarrassed?
Because the whole point is that we actually just cut and run. I think the big kind of countries have a role to play, and this idea, the fact that we can reason and legitimize the Taliban, who are people, actually, you know, men who hate women, is actually quite wild in my thinking. And I say that as somebody who deals with men who are consistently trying to roll back the rights that women have. The Taliban don't care about women, and I think we should make that clear. And I think we should be doing as much as we can in order to be able to support a real legitimate, like, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? A legitimate alternative to the Taliban, essentially.
Yeah. When you say we cut and run, who do you mean by we?
I mean you know, but I speak as a former child refugee and as a feminist and activist in saying this. But I think that both the UK and the US were actually like terrible in the way that they handled Afghanistan.
I just want to bring it to the UK because I think it's interesting the point you're making about race. It's a very different issue, but still in a form of violence against women and girls with what happened with Child Q. This was the 15-year-old girl who was in the UK, in London, pulled out of an exam and strip searched while on her period by the police while the teachers were outside the room because she was suspected of having cannabis, which there was no drugs found on her. What's your reaction to that story? I mean, I personally found it incredibly shocking. What was your reaction?
I know it's an ongoing case and it's something that should horrify us all, and I think the idea of a child being strip searched, be they female or male, should be something that we shouldn't be able to tolerate in this country.
And it said, I think in some of the reports afterwards, a safeguarding report said that racism was likely to be a factor in that.
Do you know what? It's sad that racism is like this. I remember when the race report came out, and a lot of people wanted me to kind of comment on that. Like, this country is one of the most tolerant countries in Europe, but is there more for us to do? Yes, there is, and I think COVID has actually really brought out a lot of seedy and unrest within people as well. And I've kind of experienced that in the last 2 years. That like, you know, really horrific experience of racism, which I never thought that the UK could be capable of. Ultimately, we have to talk about the Metropolitan Police and institutional racism.
You're talking about the police there and the racism, but also the sexism. And obviously the murder of Sarah Everard by the serving police officer really shone a light on sexism within the Met. I just want to read some of the messages that these were exchanged by officers at Charing Cross Police Force. They were exposed by a report by the police watchdog last month. I would happily rape you. If I was single, I would happily chloroform you. You ever slap your missus? It makes them love you more. Seriously, since I did that, she won't leave me alone. Do you think there is a misogyny?
100%. I think there's misogyny, like, you know, across this country at the moment as well, and there are things that we're not talking about. And ultimately, I think that, again, it's about the whole conversation. I was talking about prostitution being seen as work when you're actually paying for a woman's human rights and liberty to be able to have sex with you or not. Access to porn. There's a lot of things that have gone unchecked and kind of corroded the way that we have a social contract. And I say that on a day-to-day basis. I think the social contract between men and women in this country is kind of broken, and we are completely living on two different planets sometimes. Boris
Johnson said this week the basic facts of biology are important. Do you think he's on the same side of the debate as you are?
Yeah, I think anybody that understands basic biology understands that which side we're on. When I'm not here to say that, you know, that I don't believe that trans people should have rights. I fundamentally and 100% do. I've shared platforms way before anybody else did with trans women, and I completely understand how the law has to work when it's things about FGM and all these other kind of things, these conversations. And I will fundamentally support trans people, but I don't think that should actually take away the rights that women are still fighting for.
I guess others would argue that trans women are also women and are also at risk.
But the reality is that trans women are being murdered by men, so they're like the people that are killing trans women are the same people that are killing women. So we're on the same side in terms of ending violence against women and girls. And I do think that, and I do support the protection of trans women. But what I don't support is this idea that the fact that feminists like me and women who are fighting for biological women or issues that biological women are facing are the enemy. We are not the enemy. The enemy is male violence, and those things have to change.
There are reports that you were in a childcare bubble with the Prime Minister and his wife over Christmas 2020, and this of course was at a time when London was under Tier 3 restrictions. Now at the time you tweeted to say, I've had 2 days of racist and disgusting tweets because Politics for All, a Twitter account, chose to tag me in an untrue story. No, I did not break any rules. So this is your chance to clear up what exactly happened that Christmas.
I think that tweet said it all, the fact that I didn't break any rules. And what was really interesting was that the number of people who understood that I didn't break any rules, that would send me private messages but not say anything publicly with the kind of hateful things that I was getting. So yeah.
So you were in a childcare bubble which was allowed at the time with the Prime Minister and Carrie, is that?
Like no rules were broken, it's one of the kind of things, and I think it's like the whole point is that's the main thing, that no rules were broken. So, but I think we're kind of trivializing the fact that we're talking about, like, you know, refugees, we're talking about trans rights and everything else like that. I think something that was legal that happened in 2020 should not necessarily be the main bit of news today.
Did you visit the number 11 flat at any other time during lockdown restrictions?
No.
And have you been contacted by the Met Police and their inquiries?